Shalom everyone. I'm reading a book now, fiction. I write stories myself. I also write scholarly articles. But about writing fiction, I often write historical fiction or thriller, horror, mystery stories. You begin with designing the fictional characters. And every fictional character has some attachments, because it's those attachments that characterize the character in a story. And it's important that throughout the story, every page, every chapter, you will find characteristics of those attachments. Because without those attachments, you don't have a character. That's how simple it is. Now, a character can develop in a story, but often when there is change, the story is not the same story anymore. Why am I saying this? The self, that fiction that's based on denied pain, that fiction that's developed inside of our minds, in our emotions while growing up, it has attachments, likes, dislikes. Dislikes also an attachment. It's a painful attachment, but it's still an attachment. And what often happens is we are defending our attachments at all costs, because basically when you're not renewed in your mind, those attachments are all that you have. Those attachments are how you see yourself, how you experience the reality around you, how you interpret interactions with other people, how you see other people, is all through the attachments. So the self, as I mentioned before in a previous video, is a prison. And there's another thing. When you read a story, when you read a book, you have the I perspective, the all-knowing perspective, and the third-person perspective. Well, I'm not going to give a whole lecture about writing here, but I'm using it as a metaphor to you. When we go through circumstances, we often give an interpretation to those circumstances based on the attachments we have and based on past experiences. So often we view things through the self. But as I mentioned before, the self is a fiction. It's a fiction that we can't see that it's a fiction. Just as with a story, without the attachments, you don't have a character. And without the attachment, you have no character, so the story don't make any sense. That's why people are quite defensive of old ways of thinking. Because it's just like a house of cards. You know, those play cards. You take one card away, the whole thing collapses. Well, that's the thing with the self. The self cannot accept newness. The self can only exist in irregularities and when there are patterns and cycles. The self is quite conservative and quite traditional, because the self is defined based on a one-side boundary, and well, that one-side boundary has to do with perceived danger, with perceived threat. That's how the attachments are formed. And that's why the self can only operate within the same environment when everything is the same. Newness, when a new circumstance appears, that is not... When something new appears that wasn't there before, the self cannot remain in existence. It becomes obsolete, ineffective. That's why people that are not renewed in their mind, they tend to hold on to dysfunctional patterns. If when they know those patterns are dysfunctional. Why? Because then they will have to face the emptiness inside. And the thing is, when you are operating from the false premise of the self, remember the self is a fiction, you're not really there. Because the one-side boundary is to avoid discomfort and to deny pain. The thing with denying pain is you can do it, but you become stuck. And because you're stuck, you're not really there experiencing the moment. And to not face this, you have distractions. And those distractions bring euphoria, pleasure. But once those distractions are gone, you're faced with the emptiness, with the denied pain, and with the prison, the mental prison. You see, that's why, as I mentioned before, as a believer, you ought to die to self. Because whenever someone let me say like this, as I mean, the self is based on denied pain. That's why you have all these structures that we call the world in order to operate in a regularity. Those regularities are meant to keep discomfort out. But by keeping discomfort out, you're not living. Because you're treating emotional pain as something that needs to be mechanically resolved, and it can't be. So what happens is, the denial of the pain happens. The pain is, how do I say it, is transferred somewhere else, whether on someone else or on ideology. But the denial itself becomes a pain also. But while there are distractions, you're not aware of it. The moment distractions are taken away, you're faced with the original pain of being involved, of operating through a self. You're faced with the emptiness, and you're faced with the pain that has developed over time by your denial. And what happens then? Whenever you break down, people tell you to go to a psychologist in order to get into a mental equilibrium again. But here's the thing, that mental equilibrium is why. The mental equilibrium, that is the goal of having a self. It's to be in the equilibrium is basically you're expecting everything to remain the same in a pattern, that so that all discomfort in your mind and in your emotions aren't there. It's a closed world, a closed system, based on rules, based on rejection and exclusion. And so everyone that's in line with the rule or rules of that closed system is acknowledged. Because the rule can only acknowledge the rule. The rule doesn't acknowledge anything else. The rule is narcissistic and even psychopathic to some degree. So that's what the world is about, a mental equilibrium. But this mental equilibrium is not healthy. That's why people need all these distractions. That's why they need all these, how to say, black versus white, Muslim versus the West, or old versus young, or you see it with football, with soccer games, you have one club against another club. Why? Because the call to life, that's the call to repentance, they've denied it. And because they've denied the call to life, they're now choosing a so-called safe alternative. But that safe alternative is sterile, nothing ever happens over there. It's void and it's dull. It's a null existence. And that's something you don't want to be faced with. But that's where the world expects their happiness to be, in a mental equilibrium. And that's the state all sinners are drawn to, naturally. That's something sinners are stuck in, most of the time, without being aware of it. Well, when you're born again, you still will have that tendency to be stuck at a mental equilibrium, which is basically called bondage, or also called iniquity. Why? Because you became born again, but your body did not. It's still the same. Also, your soul is not renewed. Soul is your mind, will, emotions. So that's why you ought to renew your mind, so that you won't be stuck in a mental equilibrium anymore. It won't be easy, but that's what life is. life is a non-equilibrium state because it's something that cannot be compared with anything else. That's why in the world they always come in packs. The same shoes, the same hairstyle, the same way of talking, the same way of expressing emotions. In a mental equilibrium, there is no quality. That's why it's made up with quantity. Because there's a large quantity of something, it's perceived as normal and as right and as healthy, but it's not. That's why you ought not to be conformed to the patterns of this world, but you ought to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, I'm not sure if I have to tell more about this. Realize there's only one real adventure. There's only one real adventure. And that's following Christ, which automatically means you're out of the equilibrium, which is bondage in darkness. And there's only one big problem and one great danger, and that's being stuck in the equilibrium. Yet most people don't perceive being stuck at the equilibrium as a problem. They see it as the only way to live, as the only way to be. That's because they are blinded and their mind has become darkened. Those that are born again, just keep following Christ. When you're out of the equilibrium, that's when you're living. Well, I'll begin reading this story and enjoy your day also. Shalom.